Hi everyone, Leah here from EurekaCrystalBeads.com with another fun beading video for you. Before I get started, just a quick reminder to go check out the rest of our channel. And if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button and notification bell, and you'll always know when we're posting new content. Today's project is going to be how to bezel both a rivoli and chaton, and also how to connect them together. And the theme of the necklace is sort of a mother's necklace or a birthstone necklace. It can certainly be used to represent any two or more special people in your life. So what you want to do, and what I've done, is I've picked a rivoli to sort of represent the main person, I guess you could say, or it could be a mother or whatever role you play in perhaps a special child's life. And I've picked a chaton to represent a child. And this particular chaton is in crystal lime, which is, I think, so beautiful and vibrant. And the color coming up for August is peridot. And I think that while this isn't peridot exactly, it's a beautiful representation for peridot. And I like the contrast in textures that you get from the chaton to the crystal AB rivoli. So theoretically, this could represent me, and this could represent my son if he was born in August. But at the end of the day, you can also use whatever colors you like if you simply like this design. So we're going to be doing a peyote bezel around our rivoli, and we're going to be doing a different sort of bezel around our chaton. So chatons are a little trickier to do with peyote because they're so tiny. It's not impossible, but I have developed a really pretty cute little setting that I think works really nicely for a chaton. So we're going to learn those bezels and then how to attach them together and go from there. So let me show you the other things we're going to be using. First, I have a Miyuki size 11 delica. I'm using a really fun silver color, and you'll notice that I have silver and gold here. And what I'm doing is I'm actually doing sort of a mixed metal theme, which I think is a lot of fun because it makes a piece very modern and very versatile. So depending on what metal you feel like wearing that day, this is going to go great. If you want to have this nice, fun, modern mixed metal spin, it's going to be wonderful. Next, I have a gold size 15 Miyuki round seed bead. I do have a chain. You can use any chain you like, whether it's a chain that you've bought finished or whether it's a chain you even have already in your own jewelry box. That's another nice thing that you can do. Or you could always bead a chain as well. So I happen to be using a chain here, and I'll show you how I do that, but you can really connect your little pendant design here to many other options as well. Of course, I have my two little stones here, 14mm rivoli and my little 8mm SS39 chaton. I have a size 12 beading needle, and I'm using 6-pound fireline. Now for this particular color scheme, I'd probably be more likely to use crystal colored fireline, but this frankly shows up better on camera. So I'm going to use the smoke for this, but I will tell you that if you only have smoke lying around, this color scheme, because these are both opaque, are pretty versatile. So you can get away with either one. All right, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to be working with our size 11 Miyuki delicas first. And for a 14mm rivoli, we're going to need to start by loading on 36 delicas. Now I have about 2.5 feet or so of fireline here threaded up on my needle. But one of the big things I want to stress to you is before you keep going and you start your project, you want to double check that you do in fact have the right amount, because we're going to be doing even count tubular peyote. And the thing is, if you're off by even one bead, you don't have an even number anymore. So I've loaded on what I believe to be 36 beads here. I'm gonna go ahead and double check them. So you can do this one of two ways. You can move them over 2 at a time, and that's a nice way to eyeball it. I like to do 5 at a time because that helps me keep a better count of how many I have rather than just knowing whether it's odd or even. All right, that's my 36. So I'm not going to go super granular into how you do a basic peyote bezel, which is what we're doing here. You will see it done. You will have the steps explained to you. However, we do have many other videos on our channel on how to do this, as well as a video that is specifically the complete step-by-step of how to do a peyote bezel. It's exactly what I'm doing here. So that would be the best video to reference if you've never ever done a peyote bezel before, because it's going to go into much more granular detail. But you're still going to see it done here. But just in case you have some trouble with what I show you here, go reference that other video and you might find it a little bit more helpful because it'll go a little slower for you. So I'm going to start by taking my tail and my working thread, and I'm going to tie them together in a square knot, which is like a double knot, but that second knot is backwards. So it's like right over left and then left over right. Just like that. And then I like to close my two knots together first, and then I pull them down. Just what I like doing, personal preference there. Now, something I also like to note is I like my circle to be just loose enough that I can comfortably roll the delicas in my fingertips. I don't want it to be so pulled tight that it sits very stiffly, and I don't want it to be loose enough where it shows thread in between the beads. So again, I just like to roll it like that, and that's how I know I have it about what I like. Now my tail on the end here, we're going to end up eventually sticking a needle on this and weaving it into the project. So we're going to start our peyote, but first I like to travel through a few beads before I pick up my first peyote bead, because right now I'm not really coming out of a bead. I'm coming out of a knot in between two beads, and I just don't think that's the best place to start our peyote. So I'm going to pass my needle through a group of delicas, really just kind of whatever it happens to pull through on its own. You just want to be able to pull a little bit and pull that knot into your beadwork a little bit. And that knot is small enough where it's not going to cause us any problems down the line. Now to start our peyote, we're going to pick up a new delica bead, and you want to pay attention and look at the bead that you're coming out of. What we want to do now is skip over the next bead and go into the bead after that. So another way to look at that is if you're coming out of bead A, you're skipping over bead B and you're going into bead C. Or you're coming out of bead 1, you're skipping over bead 2 and you're going into bead 3. Now what happens is when I pull this down, the bead that I picked up sits next to the bead that I skipped over, and it kind of pops it out to the side, and so they kind of sit straddling this simple line of beads that we have here. This is starting to create our up beads. We're going to do that again. Pick up a new bead, skip over a bead, and then go through. That's sort of the mantra you want to keep in your head if you've never done this before. Pick up a bead, skip a bead, go through. Pick up a bead, skip a bead, go through. And as far as your tension, you want to pull just enough to get it to pull down into place. And what we're going to do is just keep going around the whole circle. And I'll show you a few more of those before we cut away and I come back with this step finished. Peyote is a pretty repetitive stitch, as you can see, so it's not a whole huge need for you to see me do it the same step a million times in a row. So this is what we got. You can see we have up beads and then little valleys in between them, or little ditches. Peyote is often called stitch in the ditch because the next row of beads goes in the little ditches that we've just created. So I'm going to cut away. I'm going to keep going around, and when I get back here, I'll come back and I'm going to show you what's called our step up, which is what will end this row completely and set us up to start the next row. Okay, we are back. As you can see, I've gone almost all the way around my ring of beads here. I have my final delica bead on my needle, and the way you do your step up is that you want to recognize the bead that you need to go through to lock this one into place, which is this one right there. But then you'll notice that there's no space after it for another bead. Well, that's because this is even count peyote, and each row has a very distinct end. Odd count flat peyote, there will always be a space because you simply keep spiraling. So what the step up is going through a second bead. Now in this case, we're going to angle our needle in and we're going to go into the inner first popped up bead. Okay, so now we're set up to start our peyote on the inner part of our circle. Now we're going to start to use some of our 15s now. And what's going to happen is that the 15s are going to start to pull our beadwork inwards just a little bit, because they're a smaller size. If you use a smaller size, it pulls your peyote in. If you use a larger size, it flares your peyote out. If you continue to use the same size, you will simply build a straight up wall and basically a tube or a cylinder. But we can have a lot of fun changing our sizes to create bezels to go around different stones. So this is even easier than the beginning row because the beads that we're supposed to go through are the beads that are popped up, which is nice and simple. And the bead that I just picked up sits in the little ditch. Now, it may not look like it's doing much yet, but as we go around this circle and we give it a nice little tug each time, what's going to happen is the beadwork is going to start to pull in because the 15s are smaller than the delicas. So I'm going to do a few of these to give you a visual, and then I will cut away to get caught up for you. That's what we got. So as you can see there, if you look at the 15s, they're starting to sort of angle in a bit more dramatically. And that is the start of what's happening. So I will be back in a minute to show you that next step up and what happens from there. You can see we have one little space left for our last 15, which I have on my needle here. And we're at our step up. So again, you want to recognize the bead that you need to go through to lock your new bead into place, and then we're going to angle to go through the second bead as well. And in this case, you'll notice that our step up, that second bead, is the first one that we added in the row that we're currently finishing. That's a great way for you to be able to recognize that. And I've given it a nice little tug so you can see we have still like a flat disc because it's pulled inward. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to do another row with 15s in the inside of the circle. And then what I'll do is I'll complete my step up and then work my way to the outer row. And again, if I've gone a little bit too fast for you and you've never done a peyote bezel before, we'll link you below to that basics of a beaded bezel video, which you'll definitely want to check out if you're having any troubles here, because that one's going to go a lot more slowly for you. All right, I'll be back in a minute. This is what we look like with a second row of our gold 15s in the inside. And then all I did was, once I'd finished my 15s, I just worked my way diagonally. So I'm coming out of the outer row and I'm coming out of an up bead, or a popped up bead in the outer row. And that's it. That's the only thing you have to worry about, is that eventually you've worked your way, so you're coming out of one of those popped up beads. Now we're going to go around and we're going to do a row with delicas. And what's going to happen is this outer row, which is sort of flared out, is going to start to get pulled in, or rather up, I should say. We'll then end up going back to 15s to pull it in. So this is all I'm doing, the same peyote steps that we've been doing this whole time. And as you start to give it some nice little tugs, and as you go around the circle a bit more, you're going to see that it starts to fold upward and create a wall. And I'm going to do a couple more of them just to show you on camera that wall forming. So when I give it a nice little tug, see, it starts to form upwards. We start to get a wall. And this is eventually what will help to keep our rivoli in place. Isn't that just gorgeous? Okay, I'll be back in a minute. I'm just going to go around all the way with my delicas and do my step up. Gone all the way around. We're at our step up. So I have my delica on my needle here. I'm going to do my step up, which, as you can see, is just going through the bead that I need to lock it down into place, and then the one after it. I'm going to give it a nice little tug, and you can see that we have a little cup. And like I showed you before, it's going to beautifully hold our rivoli there. Now all I'm going to do is go around with my 15s. This is going to cause our peyote to pull in. This is what will cover over the edge of the stone, keeping our rivoli in place. Now, what I'm going to do is, after I've done about half of this ring, and as you can see, it goes nice and fast because those beads are popped up nicely for us to go through. Once I get about halfway done with this ring, or this round, I should say, I am then going to stick my rivoli in there because I think that that's the best time to do it. If I go too much further, it gets a little bit tougher to put your rivoli in because it's pulled in too dramatically. Let's see, there we go, I'm about halfway. And if you don't, and if you do it a little earlier, there's just not as much of a pull in to kind of hold it there for you. Okay, it's gonna sit in there nicely. So now I'm going to keep finishing this round, but I'm going to do it with my rivoli in place. And I really am going to give it a nice good tug right now. And that's going to really pull the first half of those 15s I just added into place over the stone. So let's just get a few more of these done here, and then we will be back to the beginning. Now, there's that common step, which is the step up, which you will do. And I say common because it is what will complete every single row that you do. So that is how you know that your row is done. And so that's how I know when my 15s are done. Now I'm only going to do, no, I think I am going to do a second row on top. I thought maybe I would only do a single row, but I am going to do a double row on top, just like I did on the back. Okay, I'm just about there. So now we're at our step up. And the step up, because we're transitioning or we're finishing up a row that was the first row with 15s on the top, our step up will have a delicate and a 15 in it. But I really love this this two-tone look, this mixed metal look. I think it's especially fun with a color like Crystal AB, which I think is a really nice nice color to represent sort of the main person in the little duo that you're creating here, whether it's mom, grandmom, whatever. So, all right, I'm going to go around the rest of the way, or one more time with 15s, and then I'll see you back here in a minute. Okay, so finished row 2 with the 15s on the front. I just did my step up. And now what I'm going to do is work my way diagonally to my outermost row of delicas. So the row that is sort of on this very most outer rim, because that's where we're going to attach our necklace here. Now, like I said earlier, in this case, I'm attaching a chain. You can grab a chain from EurekaCrystalBeads.com. You can grab one from your jewelry box. You can bead something if you'd like. You're definitely going to want to have a plan though for it at this point. So all I did was I took the chain and I cut the very center of it. Now you want to take into account that this necklace is going to add probably about 1.5 inches, or this beaded portion here when it's done, it's going to add about 1.5 inches of length. So if you cut right in the center, you're going to have about 1.5 inches longer than the chain was originally. So if you don't want it to be any longer than the original length, you're going to want to cut out a section. So let me show you where we are here. So that's where we're coming out. So I'm going to use a few little 15s to create a little beaded loop. So I picked up 4 15s there. I'm going to go through that length of chain, pick up another 4 of my 15s, and I'm going to loop back around through that same delica. Let me get this simple, dainty little loop. Now what I will do is I will go back through that and I'll reinforce it, because this is where a lot of the stress of the necklace is going to be. So if something were to pull or snag the necklace, this is the part that would take the brunt of that and would break. So we want it to be nice and strong. Let's go through that chain there. Go through the 15s, and then you'll again loop back through that same delica. And don't worry if it loosens up a little bit, like you can see it did here. Once I pull through that delica one more time and give it a tug, the whole thing is going to get nice and tight. And that's what we have. Nice little clean beaded loop. So at this point, this thread we can weave out, and I'm going to make sure that I tie some knots along the way. I'm going to keep going, and the knots are going to be easiest to do around this area here. So I'm just going to diagonally weave my thread back here, and then that's where I'm going to weave out my thread, tying some knots, and then cut it off. Be back in a minute. Okay, so now it's time to do our setting for our chaton. So here's what we have so far. So we did our rivoli, and we attached it to one side of the chain. Now we're going to do a setting for our chaton there. We're going to sit them sort of almost at a little bit of a V. So in other words, they're not going to sit like this, though they certainly can if you'd like, but I want them to sort of sit at a little bit more of an angle. And then we'll have a loop coming up from here. So the whole thing will look a little bit asymmetrical. Now I want you to take note of the fact that right now I'm just using a rivoli and a chaton, but you can, if you want to represent more people here, you can connect other stones together in the same manner that I'm going to show you here once we finish this setting. So this is just two people, in theory, a mother and a child or what have you. But if there are more children or more people, you can simply do more rivolis, more chatons, and connect them together in all different combinations using the same method. So let's get started on our chaton here. The setting that I'm going to show you how to do, I've also done in the video for the mirror earrings. So if you like this setting and you want another idea of what you can do with it, you can go check out that earring video, the mirror earrings. That one's a lot of fun. So this is going to start by picking up 12 delicas. I have about 2.5 feet or so of fire line. Again, we're going to leave a tail that's just long enough that you could weave it in later. And we're going to tie this in a square knot. So far it's very similar to our peyote bezel. We're just working a little bit smaller scale. And now that I close down my 2 knots, I'm pulling everything down together to a cute little loop. And I'm going to travel through a few beads before I keep going further. What we're going to be doing here is not peyote. We're going to make little arms of delicas that are going to come off of our circle here. And there's going to be 6 arms because there will be an arm for every other bead. So 12 beads here, there will be 6 arms. And we're going to be using square stitch to create the arms. So I'm going to pick up a new delica. And if you look at the delica that you're coming out of, we're going to loop back around and into the same delica. Just like this. So your needle and your working thread are both popping out of the same bead and on the same side of that bead. When you pull this down, that new little bead you picked up is going to be attached right next to the bead in our original ring. So now we want to add another bead on. So we have to get to the end of this little mini chain that we've formed, and we're simply going to do that by passing up through that new bead, just like this. And what I like to do is once I get through, I like to hold it between my fingertips so that way I can give it a nice little tug and the whole thing just kind of stays a little bit tighter for me. I'm going to do this again. I want to do a chain of beads that's 3 beads long. Now, when I say 3 beads long, I am not including the bead in my original ring. I'm talking about 3 new beads. So I just added 1 of the 3 new beads. I'm going to loop back around through the bead that I'm coming out of and square stitch this bead to that one, just like that. So again, we have to get to the end of the chain. So now pass up through the new one. Now, if your little chain here is a little bit loose, maybe they're not sitting perfectly tight together, maybe they're sitting a little bit wobbly like that, don't worry about it, because once we head back down the chain, that's going to help to tighten it up. So have 3 beads added. It may look like 4 if you look sort of quick, but again, that 4th one, that one at the very bottom, that's part of the original ring, so it doesn't count as the 3 that we've added on. There are the 3. Now, I'm not going to pass up through this last bead because we now want to head back down the chain, so we don't need to pass through that bead. So we're just going to head down our chain here. And each time you do it, you can give it a nice little tug. That's going to help it to tighten up even more. So if you had any looseness issues, that can be remedied right here. Now we're going to pass through the bead that's in the original ring and then 2 more. Because now we're going to do this all over again, coming out of this bead. So we're 2 beads away from the one that we just built that arm on, because remember, we started with a ring of 12 beads. We're going to have 6 arms, 1 coming off of every other bead. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process all the way around my ring here to make my other 5 arms for a total of 6, and I'll see you back here in a minute. created all my arms here. So this was the very first arm I created. Then I created these here. I created this last arm, wove my way back down, and then wove my way up to the tip of the very first arm I created. Now what we're going to do is use 15s to close these little arms up over the top of our chaton. So we're going to use 2 15s in between each arm. So I'm coming out of the tip of this arm. I'm going to go into the tip of the next arm, heading in the same direction that the thread is already facing. That's important to note. You don't want to head this other way. Right now, the thread is on the left side or coming out of the left side of that bead, so we're going to keep going in the left direction. Just like that. And it's okay if you see some thread there. That will not stay like that. So another 2. Go through the arm, another 2. Just like this. And when we pull it tight, it's going to form a neat little cage around the chaton. And I really like this setting because it really shows off a lot of the surface of the chaton on top. It doesn't cover it up completely, which is nice. So now I'm going to go through the delica that I first was coming out of at the beginning of this step. And this is what you want to see. It's okay if it looks a little wonky and things don't look completely even. That's totally fine. I find this next part easiest by putting my beadwork down on my bead mat. What I'm going to do is take my chaton here, point side down. I'm going to stick it right in the center of that circle, stick my finger on top, and pull my thread. As you can see, it pulls right over the stone, and we get sort of a prong type look. Now, obviously, it can loosen up a bit if we let it, so you want to pull it nice and tight. And now we're going to go around this circle to tighten it and reinforce it, because what we want to see is a setting where if I put it down or let it go, it doesn't loosen up. Right now, if I pull it nice and tight, but then I let it go, it loosens back up again. So get this tail out of the way. So we're just going to head around our little circle here. And you might have to go around more than once. However many times it takes, usually between 2 and 3 times is pretty sufficient, but however many times it takes, so that way if you let it go, it doesn't loosen up on you. And the reason that that's important is because when we shift down one of these arms to do the next row, we want to make sure we're not going to be able to pull this tight anymore in the right manner to keep it tight. So we have to make sure that it's going to stay tight on its own. And you can see it's already starting to now stay tight, which is good. I'm going to go around a little bit more. And that is the start of our super fun chaton setting. Now what we're going to do is move down a bead in the arm. So I ended by coming out of a delica versus coming out of a 15 in that ring. So now I'm going to go down the next delica in that same arm, and this will also reverse our direction. And now we're going to go around again, but we're going to pick up 3 15s at a time because this circumference is a bit wider than this top one here. And we're just going to hop from delica to delica, that same corresponding delica, all the way around, and it fits in there nicely, just like this. And this will help to cover up that side edge of the chaton, which we don't really need to see here for aesthetic purposes. So I'm just going to cover it up. And plus, what's nice is it not just covers up that little edge here, but you see this beadwork from the front. So look at that. I just absolutely love it. I think using the gold and silver, or even any metallic or combination of metallics, all gold, all silver, silver, nickel, and palladium, whatever have you, I think it gives it such a beautiful high-end look, which I think is a lot of fun. Okay, so we've gone all the way around. This is what our setting looks like. This is what we have from the front, which I think just looks so pretty. Now, before we attach our rivoli and our chaton together, I do want to secure my thread here. This is the thread that I will use to attach them, but I do want to secure my thread by tying some knots, just so that way I can be assured that this won't loosen up at all. So I'm just going to travel underneath my little thread path there, tie my overhand knot. And do that one more time. You can see there's still a little bit of wiggly there, so it is not a bad thing to go around this a little bit more to keep it nice and tight. And after we tie a couple of knots, it's going to stay nice and tight. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to attach it to our rivoli. And then what we'll end up doing is, just like we did a beaded loop here, we will end up exiting out of a delica on this, and we will do a beaded loop attaching it to the other part of the chain. So the delica that you're coming out of, so in other words, two back from the front in this arm, this is the delica that you will use to attach to here. So all we're going to do is pick where we want it to go. You have options. You can have it going straight across if you'd like, and you have a little bit more of a horizontal bar type look. You can have it up like this. You could even have it even more dramatically. It's up to you. It's up to you for that placement, but I think about there is nice. I'm going to attach them together here. So it's important to know where it's going to be attached. If you take note of the row of delicas that you used to attach this loop, which again, if you counted back from the front of your beadwork, it was 4 beads back, 2 15s and then 2 delicas. That's where that was, and we used a popped up delica. That's more or less the area that we're going to be using, of course, just on a different part of the rivoli. But the difference here is that the delica that I'm coming out of on my setting is going to sit in between 2 of the popped up delicas. So if we kind of go follow this row over here. So this, for example, is the same placement as the delica we used for the loop. The delica on our chaton setting is going to sit in the little ditch right between that bead and the next one. So right between, there we go, let me give you a nice good view, right between that bead and this bead. So there's that little ditch right here. That's where the delica is going to sit. Another way you can look at that is if you look at the front of your beadwork, find a 15 that's popped up, and then you see there's the delica right after it, and then there's that little space. So the delica on either side of that little space, those 2 delicas right there, those are the 2 delicas that we're going to use to secure the delica on our chaton into place right there. So this is like the one we used for the beaded loop, but then we have the little ditch, and we're going to use the 2 on either side of the ditch to attach the delica on the chaton. So we want to find your placement. Let's see, I think we're going to go about here, about there. Keep your eyeball on that area. And what we're going to do is head into that delica that was on the left side of that ditch. Okay. So this is what we have. Now, what we want to do is also utilize the bead on the other side of that ditch, but we also want to circle back through the delica on our chaton. So what we're going to do is we want this to be centered in between the 2 delicas that we're utilizing. So we're going to, it might be a little cumbersome to hold it at first. I won't lie. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the delica on our chaton setting, and that's going to loop us back around. Then we're going to go into the delica on the other side of this one. We're going to do the same exact steps. We're just sort of going to do it in a way that allows this delica to be straddled in between those 2 delicas. And it'll make a little bit more sense when you see it. So that's what we have. They're looped together. I'm going to pull down. But if I only secure it to this one delica, what's going to happen is this is going to start to sit forward. We don't want that. We want to go through that other delica to help it keep it sort of level with the rivoli here. So here it is coming out from the delica on the chaton setting. And now here is the delica that was on the other side of that gap. It also looks like it's on the left side simply because I did flip over my rivoli, but there we go. And that's the one we're going to go through now, and it's going to help center our chaton in that little area, just like that. So now we can go through the delica on our chaton setting again. It's okay if it's not entirely tight yet. That's totally fine. We're going to go through it a couple more times to reinforce it, but this gives you your basic idea. Because what you want to see is that when you look at it from this side, they're sort of level. Now this setting is a little deeper, so they're not going to be completely level, but the fronts at least are mostly level. So we're going to go ahead and utilize those two delicas again. Doesn't matter which one you use first, honestly. You can use them. I'm using the back one all over again. That's totally fine. As long as you're using each one the same amount of times, it's going to even out. Okay, now I'm going to go through the one on the front. And then I'm going to go through the delica on the chaton setting. And then I'm going to keep going, whatever my needle happened to pop through, I'm going to keep going in that same final row that we did on our chaton setting, because now we're going to do our beaded loop that's going to complete our necklace. I'm just going to follow along this little outer ring of beads until we get to, let's see, I think I'm going to use this one right here. That's the delica that I'm going to use for my little beaded loop. So you want to pop right out of it there, just like this. How cute is that? I'm loving this. So now we're going to be using the other end of that chain. We're going to pick up our 15s here. So we did 4. I'm going to go through the loop of our chain and pick up the other 4. We're going to loop back through the delica like that, so we can create that same lovely little beaded loop. And of course, we're going to reinforce it for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier. Go through your chain, go through all the 15s. And again, as you're doing this, if it looks like that loop is starting to loosen up again, that's totally fine. Because once you go through the delica, that's when you can pull nice and tight and the whole thing will pull together nice and tight. There we go. Great little necklace. So now we can go ahead and weave out our thread. And what we can do is utilize the row of beads that were already in that second row back. A million options of colors you can do. So like I said, you can use these stones to represent people. You can use them just because you like the colors. It doesn't have to represent anybody. You can just simply like the necklace design. But I think it's always kind of nice when jewelry has meaning to it. So you could use birthstone colors, or you could simply use someone's favorite color as well. Okay, so let me just travel a little bit more. You never want to cut right after you've done a knot. You always want to travel just a little bit more, and then you cut off. Super, super adorable. Now, one of the things I like about this is, in addition to the meaning that you can have represented in the stones here, or no meaning at all, what I do think is fun is mixing textures. So I not only have two colors that look lovely together, in this case, this one could represent someone whose birthday is in August. I love the idea that you are mixing textures here. So I have an AB finish on here, bright, flashy, reflective, and then I have that crystal lime, which you can just dive right into. So I think that adds a really nice design element to a necklace if you are strictly going for design with your colors and not necessarily with a conceptual meaning behind them. I also love that mixed metal look, but you can feel free to do this in all silver or all gold, especially if you have a gold chain lying around in your jewelry box that you want to try to repurpose, which I think is another great thing that you can do with this, because if anything, it adds additional meaning to your necklace. Now, I talked earlier about adding in other stones, so you could do another stone maybe sitting right here. You could have done a big and then two small and had them in a straight bar, or had them kind of in an arc going upwards. The big to small, you could have a small one on either side. You have so many options that you can play with. But if you're doing something nice and simple, I love the asymmetry of this simple birthstone necklace. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to visit us on over at EurekaCrystalBeads.com. We're going to link you below to everything that I used in this video so you can give it a shot for yourself. See you next time, guys. Bye.